So welcome to another episode of the Revenue Lab. I'm here with Seth DeHart, an expert in advising B2B startups on their go-to-market motion. Hey, Seth, how are you doing?
Good. Expert. I have a lot to live up to.
Yeah, the expectations are super high. I mean, we met back in the days.
Just don't call me a guru, all right? We'll be okay.
We met back in the days when we both worked with, Point Nine Capital, an early stage VC company that is investing a lot of SaaS companies. And since then, I looked through your LinkedIn profile and it's an impressive list of fairly successful startups. I think you've advised now 85 different companies on their go-to-market motion. Like, tell us a bit how that is. How did you get into that? Right?
How did I get into that? Well, so I was born in I had a wild roller coaster ride of a sales career, and I was fortunate that I got into startups during university as a working student and as an intern here in America, and I was at some terrible failures and some really successful startups. And I think that's why people love startups, is if you catch a good one at the right time, it accelerates your career. I was in New York City leading a team for a San Francisco-based startup. I was the first sales hire there. I really kind of got excited about seeing it be successful. And then I became a sales leader there. Opened an office in Amsterdam to service Europe and moved my family over to Amsterdam, lived there for a long time, joined a Dutch startup, Framer, as VP of sales, and we scaled that up, and I got kind of connected with Point Nine, and Louis, who we both know quite well, asked me if I could give some advice to some of the portfolio, and ended up being really, really successful and just kind of helping founders avoid all the mistakes that I had made. And if you avoid a few mistakes and you make a few of the right decisions, implement best practices early, build a strong foundation, it's really the only way you're going to scale. And my network grew. And it's funny, many of those companies are out of Berlin. So it's like that's my second home, at least for my community. So yeah, excited to be with you here today and kind of share some of those lessons that I've either had front row seats for, or learned myself the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, awesome. I think, today we'll talk about kind of what are the most common mistakes you've witnessed, right? And with a sample size of 85 startups that going from 0 to, 2.5, 5 million typically, sometimes obviously larger by now, but I think that's the context. And with a strong focus on 0 to 1, right? I think you have a really good sample size. So what would you say is lesson number one for you?
Well, I think the commonality that I have, with those startups, and many of them are through Point Nine as well, is that the founders are selling. And I mean, I'm sure there's some successes out there, but the common thread all the way through of these successful startups is those early days are so kind of volatile with product market fit. I mean, we could spend an hour defining product market fit, right? And so those early days, having a founder selling and selling for a long time is the common thread. And I think to frame it as a mistake is the founders exiting too early from selling or trying to outsource selling to literally outside their company or hiring someone else to do it. And so I have an article we can share with the listeners called Sequencing, right? The right steps for sequencing. And I think the right order of things is really important, right? And having a founder that's able to sell, who can then bring in a sales rep or an account executive, go-to-market account executive, founding account executive, whatever you call it, to sell beside them, really helps kind of make that happen. But the key here is sell beside them, sell with them, right? Not step away and hand it over.
So most founders don't really have a sales background, right? And, you could argue, well, I think a lot of people looking at sales from the outside think, it's very I think the perception is very wrong.
What is it? It is?
And so how do you make sure that the founders are really successful in it? And, how do they ramp up on, becoming successful? Yeah.
I think it's really hard, but the best company that I've worked with had a co-founder that was a VP sales and a co-founder that was a product leader, and the VP of sales sold himself until he brought me on as the first sales rep. So by default, we had 2 people selling and one was a VP of sales managing me from the beginning, and he mentored me up. Now that's an ideal world, but often when you're constructing your founding team, I think they talk about, investors are talking about founders being the most important thing and whether they can work together. The construction of that team is really important. And if you only have product people and nobody's willing to sell, like, how are you going to get your first customers? Like, what are you going to do? Like, somebody needs to sell something. So easy for the sales guy to say. But the reality is, if you can't sell a client, even through your network, you can't sell, well, you're not going to have a business. You can't sell investors on giving you money. You can't sell. I think a misconception about selling is that it is really hard and you need to run the sales acceleration formula and you got to build a sales engine. Well, that's why I exist, right? And that's why great sales leaders exist. That's fine. You can do that later. But someone needs to be willing to participate in the act of doing it and be willing to close deals, pitch the product, pitch the company, close the deals, whatever the case may be. And then you bring in, once you're proving that it's working, people are paying you. It's almost like the worse the seller is and the more clients you have, the better the product is, right? Versus some awesome smoke and mirrors manipulative salesperson that tricks people into buying your product, right?
And then everybody churns.
And then it returns. So someone needs to be willing to do it. And then you need to have investors who are willing to mentor or advise, hired advisors, paid advisors, somebody in the ecosystem that's willing to invest the time to coach the founders on how to actually systematically sell. So the selling as a philosophy means like, let me convince you to give me money or buy my product or whatever. Someone needs to do that, especially a founder. Yeah. If a founder can't do it, asking someone else to do it isn't going to work out. What are they? They're going to figure it themselves, and then the founder takes their pulse off the kind of, you need to be talking to clients and understanding what they're saying or why they're buying, why they're not buying. Like, that's really important that they're heavily ingrained in that process for probably much longer than a founder wants to be.
And the way I understood you, talking to you before this episode is that essentially this is the journey to find product market fit, right? It's not yet to scale and what we call like go-to-market fit, right? To have one channel and scale that,
right? We've not talked about
exactly. Yeah. So it's really about like, how do you find your first customers? And obviously, I think that's something, right? Like that is super important. And I've lived through a few times, like product market fit, means it's not just the product, but it's actually the market wanting that product, right? Yeah. And there's a difference between what you just mentioned of like, okay, I really have to do a hard sell or manipulative sale. Which I think, most people, it's just not how the world works, especially not in 2024. Nobody buys. I think the first step is actually people giving you time, right? Because they usually are too busy to give you time. So do they actually listen to you? Do they give time? Do they want to run a pilot, right? Like that's kind of the first
I think we're
step.
Unpacking here is this is a very practical thing. Yeah. We're not manipulating or tricking people into buying our product, right? It's, does this solve your pain? Make your pain go away or add value to what you're doing, and will you give me money in exchange for it?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's really what a sales pitch is. So we can do discovery, we can get into the kind of nuances of it, but someone needs to do that. And that, if you're outsourcing that to somebody else to do, like you said, the founder is not hearing what the clients are saying, which is the first step in product market fit.
Yeah. And then you mentioned that like the founders stop selling too soon. So meaning they outsource basically that experience to build and have essentially a stronger product market fit too soon. Like, can you tell us a bit more about, like what does it mean? Like when, at what stage, how long should they be selling? Should they always be selling, right? Like,
the best CEOs are all being involved in strategic sales calls for public companies. There's no CEO who's not involved in some aspect. I mean, we could say none, but like the majority of CEOs of public companies are selling. Yeah. Everybody who's listening wants to IPO their company at some point. Yeah. I mean, unless you're trying to sell it so you can stop being involved of leading your company, like, the idea is that you're going to take your company through IPO and be the CEO of that company someday. That's the dream. Well, you're going to be selling at every stop, right? Investors, clients, always involved in that.
Yeah.
You're just not going to.
As the soul, right? Like, okay, let's move back. Like, as the soul AE, right? Founding AE as the founder, right? Like how long should you be doing that? And when should you start looking to bring someone on board? And what kind of profile would you be looking for?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So let's say finding product market fit can come from your network. You can sell to your network. You can call your friends who are in the space and whatever and try to convince them to give you money in exchange for the product. You can have design partners. You can go through all that stuff. That's usually in network, right? Yeah. You're talking about go-to-market fit. Outside of that, that's when you start to scale or start to prove that you can sell to people outside of your network. Can you get people interested, right, into your funnel? Can you convince them to then buy your product, right? There's no vested interest. That's truly kind of the raw test against the market. The market tells the truth and tells you whether you can do it. Now, if you start to show that you can produce revenue and get to successful customers outside of your network, now we can start to flirt with the term scale, right? Now you can bring in someone to help. Think about you being the engine and someone else can add gas to that engine. They're not going to replace you as an engine, but they can add gas. So that's that first account executive. So where people go mistake is like, great, we can sell to people outside of our network, hire a VP of sales, let's scale this to the moon. Good VP of sales costs $400,000. Okay, well, you hope you raise a lot of capital because you're going to burn a lot of it while they hire people to do the job and put layers between you and the selling. And that's where most companies go to die. So I've written an article around this topic, and it's the headline is kind of, you're going to fire your first sales leader. Well, it's because you hired them to do a thing that they shouldn't be doing to begin with. Plus, great sales leader need to have a lot of ingredients to get excited that they can scale the business. They shouldn't be your first hire. Unless they're coming in with a bunch of equity and they're going to be selling and they're committed to selling for a very long time next to the founder before they can show some repeatable, predictable motion where they can start to add more people in. But you're going to be burning a ton of cash while you figure that out, which could have been avoided. So hiring a entrepreneurial AE that has good experience, maybe domain experience. Usually this is very high IQ. They can figure stuff out. They work alongside you. The same hire would probably get bored being the 10th hire because by then it's just too repeatable of a process and they get bored. But early on, you need that horsepower and IQ to figure it out. Also a lot of grit, usually startup experience because startups change. A lot of these early days, you don't have data, so expectation setting is really tough. Compensation and KPIs are messy because it's going to be a lot of trust because you have no data. They're going to help build it. There needs to be someone who's thoughtful around building. Now, this is also the time that your investors who have sales experience come in, or you hire an advisor, because someone needs to lay down a foundation on which some repeatability can be done, milestones, the system needs to start going, right? Someone needs to be there to do that, or it just gets to be revenue on top of an unstable foundation. So any more people that you add, it just kind of topples over because there's no repeatable and predictable motion. And all that stuff's connected, right? It's compensation, the right person, expectations. So to answer your question, that starts to couple in. And the faster you go and the more success it is, the faster you can hire. And that's where the founder can start to drift out a little bit and be more of this account executive shadowing. And now the founder is shadowing, still on call, still listening in, but can start to do less and less, a little bit more of the management aspect of it.
Yeah.
Also,
so I want to go back to
advisory role, but like this is someone needs to be there to help with that process and set up best practices.
Yeah. So just for the audience, so don't hire a sales leader when you want to scale or like go from founder-led sales, right? Not as your first hire. And would you recommend to hire one or two founding AEs?
I'd love it if you could find two. It's very hard. Yeah. But two is de-risking it a bit. So yes, two. And the founding AE is going to be a full cycle account executive who's willing to build pipeline by doing SDR work. And then because if you don't have pipeline, you don't have a sales organization, right? Pipeline is the key. If you take nothing away, how do you create pipeline is the future success, right? And so future revenue. So they're going to be creating the one or two of them can be creating the SDR playbook. And a playbook is a very practical thing of what you do that will have a result. So you don't need to write a playbook. It's how do they book meetings? How do they create discovery calls or demos or however we want to call that first meeting that creates pipeline? that ends up being the playbook so that when you hire an SDR or 2 SDRs or 3 or 4, they have a predictable way to create pipeline for your AEs. So you think about it, you're kind of like slowly bridging gaps in a very practical way, which is that foundation, which is that playbook to get to the point that you have, your AEs are ramped up because they know how to create pipeline, but they're spending so much time closing deals, they can't spend enough time creating pipeline. So you get this seesaw effect. Is it Vippa? Is in German, the Vippa? Yeah. It's the extent of my German. We're doing this in German. That's the methodology, is that kind of like bridging gaps with low risk, high leverage people that creates that repeatable. And that's the sales engine. That's the sales system. And you get that far enough along. That's when a sales leader, that becomes very attractive to come in to help scale that.
How do you comp the founding AEs?
Very well. with a lot of money. So founding AEs, I think there's in the ideal world, compensation is heavily weighted on commission, right? That's efficient and that's how it's done. So you pay them their base salary, and while you're figuring these things out, you can pay them commission on closed deals that the founder's closing. That's one way. You can pay them that and meetings booked. I'm hiring one right now for a company. We'll be paying them on meetings booked to start. They're a account executive that's going to be closing revenue in the future. But until we build up that pipeline and figure out how to create pipeline, we're going to pay them way too much to do SDR work. Yeah. Because until they can figure out how to create pipeline, what are we talking about? And so we'll pay them to do that. I don't like paying salespeople just to show up to work, because it's not fair to pay them no commission because they just quit a job where they were closing deals to take the risk on your startup. So that's not fair. But also just to pay them commission for showing up without linking it to advancing their ability to add value to the organization is also a bit of a waste. So I've seen tests, demonstrations of product and industry knowledge and compensation linked to that. So you get a grade. It's not like some written test. It's an oral test with leadership to show, have you been paying attention? Have you been taking notes? Have you been studying? Can you speak competently about this? And your percentage of that might be for your first month, the percentage you get for your commission for that month. Right. And your variable compensation is basically how much annually you would get. So it's base salary plus variable. Variable usually comes from bonuses and commission. Whatever that is agreed to in the contract, don't put how you get there in the contract. It's going to change, and then you'll be changing your employment contract all the time. Let's say it's 80K plus 80K, or 80 plus 60, or 60 plus 60. Divide that by 12 and then pay them some KPIs linked to that for the first few months, and transition it to revenue as fast as possible. Transition it to commission on revenue as fast as possible.
And if you think about, you've done this now many times, right? Like, how long is the ramp for a founding AE? When should they start closing deals?
I think I could say depends on a lot of these answers. I'm trying to make it practical, but it completely depends on the sales cycle length and the complexity of the deals you're closing.
Yeah.
Right? Because it really is. Because if you're doing transactional deals that have a 1-week sales cycle and the product's not very complex, they can be closing deals month 1. I've seen that and done that. On the other side, if it's an enterprise deal and it takes 9 months to close deals, those are really hard to compensate those folks, because pipeline creation, when's it going to close? That's doing it on hard mode. And that's when the founders need to be selling for even more intensely for a much longer amount of time. Yeah. Although that ends up being enterprise in the early days it ends up being product that you're building for the enterprise anyway. So the founders by default have to be heavily involved in those deals. So.
Yeah. I think one other thing you mentioned, and I think that's super interesting, is like, don't listen to late stage advice from, for early stage companies, right? Like, what do you mean with that?
Well, there's a lot of late stage investors getting involved in early stage deals, right? It's a great way to get an eye on deals, get them in your portfolio, but you get to own all of the follow on and funding. And there's pros and cons, and you can debate that on another podcast with investors of getting a Series B investor to do your seed round, like, right, the signaling risk around not following on or not leading your A round. There's a lot of stuff to it, but we're all trying to pattern match, right? And if you think about me as an advisor, my advantage over a lot of other advisors who are trying to do it now and other great sales leaders who are better than me is my sample size, right? I said I've actually worked alongside 85 founders in their companies as an operating advisor, right? I've also advised probably another 100 companies one-off or at a distance or, over the years. I've seen all of these things, and what we're all trying to do is pattern match, right? And late stage investors pattern match that all of their late stage companies that are their unicorns that are IPOing all have world-class CROs who have IPO'd companies before. Well, if I'm going to draw the conclusion from that, every startup should have a CRO that's IPO'd a company before. Now I'm pushing this to make a point, but the idea is like, no, you would never hire a CRO as your first sales hire who's used to managing 100 plus salespeople. Yeah. The first person needs to get their hands dirty. So I see these, and there's a lot of investors that I respect giving this advice that's like, they need to hire a VP of sales. I'm like, not as the first sales hire. You're just saying that that's what you see your other companies that have matured to a point that they need a VP of sales that are successful, but they didn't get there by hiring a VP of sales first. And I'm surprised at how many really smart investors. You want a lot of clicks on LinkedIn. You post that post about late stage investors advising startups to hire a VP of sales and not hiring a VP of sales as your first sales hire. That always goes viral because everyone loves that post, because anybody who knows anything about early stage knows that that's an idiot thing to say, yet all these investors are still saying it.
Yeah. No, I think we've all heard it and seen it. And funny. Then I think that's often where, it breaks companies. You do the first one, you do the second one, and then you're totally in despair. A year or 1.5 years have passed. And
I get brought into many companies after they fired the VP of sales because they hired them too soon. And now they need to rebuild up in a correct way.
Yeah.
Because it's alluring, it's magic, it's appealing. I'll do everything for you. You don't have to sell. Just give me a bunch of money, right? And they're too naive to realize how much risk they're taking. The smart ones would never take that much risk unless they're taking down 10% equity of your company as a late founding partner.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't, right? Because it's too much risk. The best ones are like risk assessment maniacs, right? They're fanatics about assessing risk in a startup about, does it have enough ingredients to scale to the point that I can actually make a lot of money? Yeah. And founders always oversell this. So good VPs of sales are paranoid unless the evidence and numbers really hold true.
Yeah. I think there's a good post from Jason Lemkin about, I don't remember how many different type of VP of sales, but I think it's fundamentally a question of where are you at your maturity, right? Like what kind of revenue stage are you in? And then what kind of people do you actually need? What kind of profile? It's not just from 0 to 1, right? It's from 1 to 5 or 10
You're going to turn over your sales leaders.
So it's exactly. And there's like different experts for different stages of a company. And these are different qualities, right? Like whether you're hiring from, like 5 to 25 or 50, or you're just managing based on metrics, or you're really becoming very good at forecasting, at a later stage when you IPO and, your corridor should be plus minus 1%. So, I think there's like a lot of different
it's probably the shittiest thing. I mean,
stages.
You're a founder, it's probably the shittiest thing is that the company outgrows great people that helped you get there. And you can't always find places for them. Like I think
it's always frustrating. And, at the same time, I think, this is something I've learned the hard way during my time at Fiverr, where, people always were pushing for promotions. And what I always told them was like, look, I mean, I can promote you, but I'm going to measure the next step up differently. And then I might need to, take you out. And I actually don't want to do this, right? So are you ready for that step?
Right,
and
you're going to be measured against someone I can hire who's already done this 3 times.
Exactly. And so I think it's like, I personally love promoting within. I think it's fantastic, but not everybody can do it, right? So it really depends on the people. And we've had people who, came in really as interns and left as VPs and, run like very large companies and have been super successful, and then went out and continued that success throughout their career. And then others where it just failed, right? And I think it's something that where you have to be very explicit and clear about as a leader to make sure that people understand this.
And I think mature people understand it. It's just people that are more naive or new to it don't understand. Like I was going to mention, I've never brought a company through an IPO as a sales leader.
Yeah.
So if I got a company up to 50, 75 million in revenue, I would expect them to bring in someone above me who's done it 3 times.
Yeah.
Now my
Yeah.
ego would be like, maybe but I know, like that doesn't make any business sense to have me figuring out our IPO. Like, well, why would you do that? So,
yeah, great. I mean, we talked a bit about like product market fit, right? And the idea of founders being in the weeds to essentially not just build a shiny product, back in the day, back in the boiler room, but like really focus in on the market and understanding what the market wants. And I think there's like always this idea when you build a product, all the customer feedback that makes that product so much better, right? And these like small little things that really have a big impact. I think we've all seen those, and sometimes you just don't see them, right? So I mean, I think another problem you've seen is like misjudging the strengths of product market fit, right? Like I like to say product market fit is like a scale from 0 to 10. And, it's actually always there, right? Like you can scale to 50 million or 10 million and suddenly, you have a change in the macro environment like we've had the last 3 years. And suddenly your product market fit slips and you might not be a 9 anymore, but a 4 or 5. And then, you're in big trouble. So, tell me a bit more about what you mean with like misjudging the strength of product market fit.
I think founders often overstate their strength of product market fit. And I think it's because it's, they're selling it to everybody. You got to believe. I get that. But I think to your point, if you think it's there and it's not, and you hand it over to somebody else, like a sales leader, you're toast, right? And so I think that's the secondary reason we talked about earlier of being involved in all of those customer conversations to keep your pulse on it and understand what's going on. Because you can blame somebody else for not hitting their sales goals, but you're to blame. It doesn't matter who you're blaming, you'll be responsible for it at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter whose fault it will be, right? The founder will have to ultimately take full ownership and responsibility. And so I think anytime you're putting in layers between leadership and product and sales is when things start to get a little bit dicey. And you get this weird effect where founding team is not in touch with customers and they're saying things that are out of touch with reality. And then the middle managers often get to the point that they're kind of holding both sides. The frontline salespeople are saying stuff and the founders are saying stuff. And if they're all in line and they're close together, everyone's life is good, or everyone's in line. But when you start to having to pull them, at some point it breaks, right? I talk to a lot of sales leaders about this, which is like, if reality and reality distortion is too far apart, you get into this problem. And either you're saying to your sales team, yes, the founders don't get it, or you're agreeing with the founders and your salespeople are saying, our leader doesn't get it. At that point, you're done.
Yeah. I mean, what I've seen a lot is, you basically, once you start hiring a few sales folks, right? Like, I mean, you want to close deals. There's a lot of pressure to close deals because you runway and you want to raise, more capital most often when you're VC backed. And so you get pulled into many different directions from a product perspective. You don't really have a clear ICP just yet because your sample size is too small. So you basically take on every deal, which I think is generally fine to learn what your ICP is, right? Like in the initial days. But then the question is like, how much commitment is there, on the product side that totally derails your roadmap, and you're basically in a situation which is really challenging, right? Because you're getting a lot of pressure from the market. And so, I think your recommendation here is like, okay, founders always be in the market, probably, way further than 0 to 1, right? Like 5, 10 million.
Well, to your point, things change. And if you're out of touch with it and your product weakens their product market fit because something changes and you don't know what's going on, well, you can fire salespeople. You can fire your VP of sales, right? That happens all the time. Well, then what, though? That doesn't solve your problem. Now you're swapping out a VP of sales because you believe this product market fit that there isn't. You lie to the next guy who comes in, or you not even lie, you just misset expectations. They come in thinking this product market fit. There's not. They can't scale revenue. And then eventually you're going to have to come to reality because the market is telling you the truth. And everybody's opinion does not matter, right? It's what the market is saying. And so it's just a harsh, brutal reality. And so to be able to listen to that is so, so important.
Yeah. How important is like capacity from your point of view? I mean, I think if you have really strong product market fit, often at some point you have a situation where there's just too many incoming requests of customers.
Yeah, and I don't want founders to be involved in every sale, right? They need to start to phase out. But they should be in the forecast calls with the sales team, hearing what people are saying. They should be listening to customer success and being on some calls. They should also, when I was saying that CEOs are always selling, they're coming in on strategic deals to understand what's going on and why, and helping close deals. Because a founder showing up and listening and saying, we can get that on the roadmap for you to close this $500K deal. Then people know it, versus a salesman being like, yeah, don't worry, we'll put that on the roadmap. Those are two different things. So finding a way to stay close, either with current customers or sales, is what the best founders do. I mean, it's not kind of the sexy thing that you sign up to be a founder, but that's what the best ones are doing.
That's why everybody loves product-led growth, where you just swipe credit cards and it's all working. But then, 5 years later, you figure out that it's actually product-led sales. And actually, at some point, you're back in the game.
Because these bigger deals need humans to close them.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe last question or last area of questions, obviously there's kind of the operational excellence side of things, the tooling, the systems, the processes, right?
You're turning me on.
What have you seen there? Obviously you don't need the fully bloated stack of 25 different go-to-market tools at your 0 to 1 stage. But what do you need?
What do you need? I thought that was correlated with success. No, buy more tools. Everything is practical, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even we've been talking a little bit of theory, and I kind of roll my eyes even when I'm saying theory, because all of this is nuanced to each company and everything needs to be practical, right? You need a CRM, and the CRM can get you most of the way there. You need practical milestones to know where you're headed with deals and what you need to do next, right? You need a way to book meetings, right? What is that mechanism to do that? What are the different pieces that you need to really understand this? Can you forecast accurately? For me, forecasting is an indicator of efficiency, predictability, and effectiveness of your sales. That's operational excellence. Forecasting is a measurement of operational excellence, right? That's often neglected. And so, again, very practical. How do you get discovery calls booked with people? How do you market? Whether it's direct marketing with SDRs or account executives, putting a message in front of people's faces with email, phone, LinkedIn, or finding them where they are. How do you get them interested in a conversation? How do you get them through a discovery to identify whether there's a good fit between the value that you add and problems or pain or value that they need? And then what is the steps through the process? And then how do we close them? And then does this whole thing economically make sense? And then where do we add more people because we don't have enough capacity?
Yeah.
And then sequencing the right steps in the right order of stacking that up. It's very practical. And I think that's where, as long as you're willing to talk to people, then you're selling, really, right? And that's the first step of putting the product in front of people and saying, what do you think? The best thing I ever did was I'd worked for startups that failed. And then my mentor, who was an account executive when I was an SDR booking meetings for him, called me and said, I'd like to hire you to be the first sales rep at this company. I had learned that's first sales rep is a high risk, high reward role. So I said, I'm not really sure. Let me kind of product market fit test this. So I literally took a demo of the product and I'd put it in front of prospects and I'd say, what do you think about this product? And people would say, yeah, that looks really good. I'll give you money. Now, was that a good sales pitch? Was that a good sales process? Hell no. Was I running a good discovery? No. It was horrible. But the fact that people were like, yeah, I'll give you money for this. I was like, wow, if I can learn how to actually sell this and do a discovery and do proper demo, this is really going to go. And so
I love this. I love this also as an interview question, right? Like if somebody comes to you and says, okay, let me take this product and sell it to a few folks, right? And then I get back to you next week, you have somebody who's very entrepreneurial and driven and want to succeed. So I think that's I
had been burned, so I was really nervous. And my now wife, I just proposed to, she was going to move from Europe to the US and New York City, which isn't cheap. But it worked out. And I would be talking to you right now if had that not happened. And so,
yeah.
The
Awesome.
market's going to tell the truth, and selling is putting it in front of the market.
I know we're at time. Like anything else you want to share with the audience?
Again, I think this can be blown into so much theory and bullshit around selling, and it's really just about practical street smarts. It's really just about putting product in front of people and then getting the right advice at the right time, right? And I think it'd be, again, I know it's kind of selling my own book here, but like there's so many new advisors out there or wannabe advisors who are successful sales leaders who have only known how to sell their thing, and they come in, I've seen them, they recommend you doing the same thing, right, that they did. And I think what I learned, and I was fortunate that my first really successful scale up that I led was all outbound. Then when I was over at Framer, it was all inbound. So I always thought outbound was the best way. Then I was at Framer and I saw inbound was the best way. Then I became agnostic to whatever the best way is the best way. And so I think a lot of people need to be mindful of who they're getting advice from and what those people did before. If you're bringing in an advisor who only did SMB in your enterprise, it's not going to work, right? Yeah. And so the idea is to make sure you get people that have a large sample size and get advice from the right places. I mean, I'm skewing this near towards advising because that's what I talk about and think about, but it's like, understand who you're getting advice from. Have they done it before? What did they do before? And do they have a big enough sample size, like the late stage investors? If they worked with a ton of early stage and they're giving early stage advice, or is most of what they do late stage and they're giving late stage advice to early stage? Like, know the source of your advice and what the experience those folks have. And, I think good guidance can really help avoid mistakes and accelerate success. So
awesome. Really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, man. Always good catching up.
Yeah, awesome.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.